Hi, my name is Patrick Murphy-Racey. I'm a Sony artisan of imagery. I wanted to share with you some thoughts that I have about the brand new Alpha 1 camera body that was announced this week by Sony. I've broken down my thoughts into a couple of different categories. So the first is image quality, the second is the still frame rate, the autofocus improvements, of which there are many, the entirely new EVF experience, like what it's going to be like to have your eye in the viewfinder, the processing power of the new sensor, the new mechanical shutter, which is pretty breathtaking, the video capabilities of the camera, and then finally I wanted to talk about what the A1 means. What does Alpha 1 mean in the camera, like the whole world of cameras? So first I'm going to jump off and talk about image quality. First of all, this is a 50 megapixel, it's technically a 50.1 megapixel sensor, full frame sensor. It is going to be a tremendous sensor. Sony has learned so much about color science, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. I am completely trusting them on the sensor, because I haven't seen the camera, I haven't had it in my hands yet, but I've had all the cameras in my hand since the A7, and if they are going to say this is the greatest thing they ever made, which it is, I believe them. The second thing is, a lot of sports photographers in particular are going to say 50 megapixel, I don't need that. That's crazy big file. I don't want to wrestle with those. And I agree to a point, but the part where I kind of really, I got thinking about this is not a detriment but an asset, is when you do punch in, when you zoom in on the sensor to 1.5x, you still have a 21 megapixel image left. To put it this way, when you push the button on your camera, your lens, however you've programmed it to punch in to 1.5x on the sensor, you are effectively getting about the same file size you'd get from an A9 II. Now that is incredible. That's an unbelievable deal. Also, if you, let's say that you have a 400-2.8 and you can't afford a 6, or you can't get one, whatever. This is going to allow you to be at 600 millimeter all the time at 2.8 with the resolution of an A9 II. Again, that's phenomenal. But the ability to flip back and forth and get your 400-2.8 view and then your 600-2.8 view is pretty fantastic. 15 stops of dynamic range. If you haven't figured out by now, when Sony says they make an amazing low light sensitive sensor, they do. And this is one more stop than the A9 II was advertised to have. I believe them. I need to see the camera and shoot it, of course, but it seems that they have figured out a way to make a massive file and do it in the dark, to be where you can shoot in the dark with low light and very low noise. This is a big deal, especially for those of us that do lots of different things. I digress. Let's keep going. Let's talk about the frames per second at 30 frames. That's crazy. It's so fast. Now, with the A9 and the A9 II at 20 frames a second, I can very consistently get 2 frames of running back off the ground, both feet off the ground, flying through the air. So in other words, each time they push off in a step when they're running, I can typically get 2 frames of that running back in the air before they land, or plant rather. At 30 frames a second, I think it's going to be possible to get 3 frames of them in the air, which twice in a sequence is incredible. This means that if you have a running back that you're shooting and maybe they're going to make 10 yards, how many steps do they make in 10 yards? If you've got 3 frames of them off the ground every step, from once you pick them up until once they get hit, it's going to increase the take of everyone's photography. Like, your game takes are going to be phenomenal. So 30 frames a second is better than 20. And I'm quite frankly amazed that they did that. I am glad, however, that they have given us the option to turn it down. So we don't have to be at 30 frames. We can go to 20. We can limit the camera to 20 frames a second. We can go to 15 and 10 and 5. So depending on the sport you're shooting, 30 frames might not make sense, but if you're doing downhill skiing, if you're doing volleyball spikes, if you're doing golf swings, You're wanting that contact of the head of the club on the ball. 30 frames a second makes all the sense in the world. So the next thing is autofocus improvements and advancements. Now, there's a big deal here. This is not trivial. Number one, there are many autofocus improvements over the A9 II, which is already unbelievably awesome to use. So the sensor readout speed is 1.5 times faster than the A9 II. Now that seems crazy. Now this is going to help us a couple different ways. Number one, it's going to help us with the buffer. So there's two parts of that. But the camera is able to move images off of the sensor, the imaging sensor, into RAM and then towards the cards faster than ever before. And I can tell you from experience using the A7S III with the new CFast cards, it is so much faster than even the tough cards from the G cards from Sony. So we're talking about breakneck speeds for image transfer and storage. But the autofocus improvements are phenomenal when you talk about like a golf swing. When the image is reading 1 point times faster, we're talking about the pixel and the read-write ability of the camera to capture something moving. It's 1 point times faster. So if you're shooting a golf swing, there's a little bit of rolling shutter in an A9 II's file. It's minimal, but it's there. This is 1.5 times better. Now this also gives an advantage on the video side, but we're not going to talk about that yet. We're going to get to that in a minute. So if you shoot a lot of golf, you're going to see a straighter and straighter shaft in a wood swing than you've ever seen before. So at the tee box, your images are going to have an immediate change for the better, which is really exciting. The next thing is there are 66 more AF points in the A1 Alpha 1 than there is in the A9 II. So the A9 II and the A9 have 693 autofocus points. This camera has 759, which is crazy. Now, one thing that many people will miss is that when you're in APS-C mode and you punch in, you don't lose autofocus points. Now, I'm not sure how they did this, but you still have all 759 autofocus points working for you in APS-C. So if you're shooting a lot of baseball, for instance, and you're shooting outfielders from a perch, like a first base or a third base perch, we've never been farther away from the action as sports photographers in the history of the games that we've covered. I mean, since photography has been around, we've never been pushed back because of COVID and the need to social distance than now. And so this camera couldn't come at a better time for us as sports shooters. It's awesome. Next thing is there's something that also might be missed by so many people, I think. The camera can retain autofocus with an aperture or aperture plus teleconverter combination of up to f/22. This is a significant thing. It means that almost any lens you choose to put on the camera, if that lens will use the 1.4 or the 2x FE teleconverters, it's still going to have autofocus. Now, this is a big deal for many people that shoot birds, for instance. Birders are in love with the 200 to 600 G lens. It's amazing. It's an f/6.3 aperture. So this means that if you take an Alpha 1 and you mount a 200 to 600 G lens on it with a 2x converter, you're going to have autofocus and room to spare. So this is a big deal. I'm going to talk about brass tacks on this. If you take the cost of the Alpha 1 and add the cost of the 200 to 600 G lens, that cost is $8,500. That is $9,000 cheaper than a 600 f4 GM with an A9 II. So the Alpha 1 is going to save you tons of money at $6,500 a pop, at least in the United States. Anyway, I digress. And then also you're going to have twice the precision and accuracy that you had in the A9 II, which is better than every other camera that came before it in the Sony lineup. So let's talk about that a little bit. The A9 and the A9 II could achieve what's called 60 times per second autofocus. 60 over 20 means this. that if you're shooting at 20 frames per second and the camera can do 60 times per second autofocus adjustments and exposure, this means that the A9 and the A9 II giving you a chance to, it's basically autofocusing and doing precision adjustments, micro adjustments of focus 4 times per frame at 20 frames a second. So not only does the Alpha 1 go faster, 1.5 times faster than the A9 II, so you're getting 30 frames a second, they've doubled the precision and speed of the autofocus system, so that if you take 240 over 30, you get 8 adjustments, micro adjustments per frame. Now what this means is that when that camera is sitting and it's shooting a moving target at 30 frames per second, it has enough time in between each frame to make 8 micro adjustments of focus. This is absolutely freaking insane. I mean, it's no wonder that they're advertising improved, auto eye AF and all the tracking and everything. But this thing is going to be like a Dodge Demon in the viewfinder. It is going to be so fast. I doubt that our human eyes are going to be able to actually register what's happening in the viewfinder while it's doing its work, even with the new viewfinder, which I haven't gotten to yet. So this is not a incremental increase in power and autofocus speed. This is a whole other ball game. Literally, this is a whole other level. Very exciting. The other thing that I want to point out here is, and this has to do with the anti-flicker feature. The A9 II got anti-flicker, which is a huge upgrade over the A9, which had lacked it. So when you get on these flickering lights and you got all these weird colors you're seeing in sequential frames, this is a big deal that the Alpha 1 has this also. But they have achieved now anti-flicker in electronic shutter. Prior to this is the first camera to ever have this in the history of Sony's full-frame line, or anybody's camera. So basically what this means is that you can, instead of leaving 20 frames a second on the A9 II and going to 10 frames a second on the mechanical shutter, which is what you have to do to get anti-flicker, on the Alpha 1, you're going to be able to stay in electronic shutter and then have anti-flicker also. You're going to be able to have your cake and eat it too. It's insane. So this is a not often talked about thing. Lots of reviewers are talking about the camera, but this is a big deal for sports shooters especially, and performance, anywhere where there's like LEDs used, and bad lighting, poor lighting. Next, I want to talk about the new EVF Experience. What is the experience going to be in the viewfinder of the Alpha 1? Now, I can tell you about this firsthand because the EVF is the same exact design as the A7S Mark III. So if you want to see what that's like, you can go to your local camera store if you have one, and you can actually look around the store through the viewfinder of the A7S III. It's the same. Now the speed of that viewfinder is not the same as the A7S III. It's twice as fast again as even that. But the new EVF is phenomenal, and I'll be honest with you, I love the A9 II. It's a fantastic camera. It's the greatest sports camera until a couple days ago on the planet. But it's difficult to go from using the A7S III and the A9 II at the same time because you see the degradation of the viewfinder so fast. And so the Alpha 1 has this new viewfinder, but with double the speed of the A7S III. So this is a big deal. One other thing that often gets missed, I wear glasses. They're a pain in the butt sometimes, especially wearing a mask, going in and out of the cold. But very, very important that the A7S III and the Alpha 1 are the first two cameras that Sony's made that give us eyeglass wearers eye relief, or what Nikon calls high point viewfinders. So you can actually change the viewfinder to push the image away slightly from 41 degrees to 33 degrees. And you can, so if you don't wear glasses, you can see it up close and personal and a little bit larger. But for those of us that wear glasses and have difficulty seeing the entire inside of the viewfinder and all the information there, you can choose to push it out a little bit. And this is a huge benefit for those of us that wear glasses and shoot sports. Next, I want to move into the processing power upgrades in the camera. This is, again, none of these are trivial. These aren't like slightly, we're not going from 2 liter to 2.1 liter in an engine. This is huge difference. So there is 8 times more processing power in the Alpha 1 than in the A9 II. Holy crap. That's insane. So this means that the buffer is going to be so much faster to write to cards. And remember, we're not going to be writing to G cards in this camera, though we can. The old 295, 300 speeds that we're used to with the A9 and the A9 II, that's not what we're talking about here. We're going to C fast. So we're going to go fast, basically, with these new cards. And so it means that the camera can get rid of the images off the sensor faster, 8 times faster than it could before. And what's waiting to receive those images is a big old garbage can that instead of going 295 and 300 megabits per second is going 700 and 800 megabits per second. So for those of us that have been frustrated at times by a big burst, and then we're waiting for the camera to finish writing to disk while we're trying to get out of the APS zoom or whatever, trying to access menus, I predict that this camera is going to be nearly instantaneous. I think we're going to be able to shoot a ton of images, big files, and the camera's going to be able to get rid of them quickly enough so that we can get back into the menus and make adjustments without being held up and being waiting on the camera. Now, we'll have to get one in my hands. Like as soon as I get one, I'll be able to test this and tell you, and I'll do that right away. But for right now, I'm greatly encouraged by this because it's a huge, huge benefit. The other thing I want to talk about is the new mechanical shutter. Now, this is a big monster thing for some of us. Some of us won't give a hoot about this, but sports photographers in this country, in the United States, the big 4 sports are football, baseball, hockey, and basketball, not necessarily in that order. So the A9 and the A9 II reigned supreme. They just owned all field sports. Anything available light, the A9 and A9 II, it's like, it's a street sweeper, man. You go out there and you don't miss much. You just nail virtually everything, and the camera does a great job as long as you do your part. However, on the side of going indoors and shooting on strobes, many people don't realize every NHL game, in this country and in Canada, people are shooting on strobes, especially the team photographers and the photographers shooting for the NHL. It's the same thing with the NBA. The NBA, they prefer their images to be lit with strobes and the catwalks that simultaneously synchronize when you take a picture. Now, what has happened with the Alpha 1 is so significant. It's the biggest news in shutter technology really since about 1982, which is when Nikon made the FM2 camera sync at 250th of a second, which was unbelievable. It took Canon another 4 years to figure out how to do it with the T90, going way back. So what they've done is they've taken what is normally a spring-loaded focal plane shutter, and they've added an actuated motor to it. And this motor will act as like a turbocharger, if you will, or a supercharger. So the spring is what it gets released, and then the motor takes over and speeds up the shutter firing, and then slows it down so that it dampens properly, so it doesn't blow up, basically. And they have now taken a technology that was stuck since 1982. That's a long time ago. And they've made it to sync not at 3/20th, which would be a huge increase for a full-frame camera. It syncs at 400th of a second. So they have effectively doubled the ambient light that you can drop down when you're on strobes over ambient light in any arena that you're working. It's a phenomenal, huge upgrade of not just a Sony camera, but it's upgraded the possibility of using a focal plane shutter to sync strobes worldwide, it's just phenomenal. So the A9, like I said before, was always the best at shooting sports in available light in a field sports situation or under constant lighting. But once you put strobes in there, it had a weakness, and it could only go to 200th of a second. Alpha 1 has achieved 400th of a second flash synchronization. Now, this is not with proprietary Sony strobes. This flash sync is for Pocket Wizard. It's for a direct connection with a PC terminal to Speedotrons or Dynalights or Profotos, whatever you want to do. However, your Elenchrom is what I use. So we are now going to be able to go into arenas that have been relit with LEDs, which are much brighter than they ever were before, and we're going to be able to overcome that ambient light by a full stop more than we could before with Alpha 1. It's the only camera in existence that can do this outside of a leaf shutter camera. So this advance is not trivial, and so many shooters that have been covering the NHL and the NBA for years and years, and also, many schools actually in the NCAA have volleyball lit. A lot of volleyball is being played in basketball arenas. Team handball, another one. So these are sports that have been kind of suffering a little bit from lack of innovation in sync speed for strobes. This is a big deal. I want to also point out that if you are using an Alpha 1 and you're in that APS punch-in mode, you can actually sync flash at 500th of a second. This is the first digital camera since the original Canon 1D that could achieve this. And remember, the 1D was not a full-frame camera. It was a cropped-in sensor. So this is a full-frame camera shooting full frame at 400th of a second with any flash, or with a Pocket Wizard. So it's a massive upgrade from what we've had before, and it's so cool that I've been begging Sony for since 2014. I've been begging them for 250 sync, and it's just like them to not give me 250, not give me 3/20th of a second, but give me 400th of a second. So all of us benefit from this. The last thing I want to talk about is video. There are, even as awesome as the A7S III is, and it is awesome, there are so many advantages of Alpha 1 over the A7S III for the purpose of shooting video. For one thing, it shares a full-size HDMI port. This is a big deal, but one of the things that the A7S III cannot do is shoot in S35 mode with 4K. The sensor just doesn't have enough resolution to accomplish that. The Alpha 1 has a 50.1 megapixel sensor. It's got all the real estate in the world to accomplish 4K video with Super 35 glass. Now this is a big deal for real hardcore cinema lens owners and users. In the world of like making independent films, especially, and shooting advertising, TV commercials, things like that, people are mostly shooting manual focus cinema glass, made by Zeiss or Ingenieur or whoever. And these lenses are phenomenal, but they're all made for Super 35. And so kind of a frustration for many of those people that the A7S III was so amazing with, 4K 120p and all that stuff and 10-bit. But now we have a camera that you can use all those fancy lenses and achieve 4K at the same time. So this is a big deal. The second thing I want to mention is the USB-C port in the Alpha 1. This is a big deal too because the transfer data rates are really fast using that port. Also, the camera will charge faster. So all the cameras that have the USB-C port on them, like the A7R4 and the A7S III, these cameras will charge in a fraction of the amount of time. And what I'm talking about is plugging the camera in with a battery in it. You can actually charge the battery that way. You don't have to have an external battery charger. So you can be driving down the road in your car using the cigarette lighter to power and build up a charge on your Alpha 1, for instance, going to assignments or whatever. Cinetone S is huge. Cinetone S is coming to us from the big brains of the people that make movies. Cinetone S is a feature on the Venice, the Sony Venice camera, which is a phenomenal, motion picture ready camera. The FX9 and the FX6 also benefit from having that look as well. And now, for the very first time, one of the DI division cameras, one of the still cameras, is getting Cinetone S. So this is huge, because let's say that you're working on a picture and you want to do a 3-camera shoot on a scene. You don't have to have 3 FX9s or 3 Venice cameras. You can actually use an Alpha 1 in place of having that camera, especially for short takes. This is going to be a big deal, because for the still photographer, $6,500 is a lot of money to pay for a camera. In the film side of things, it's dirt cheap. For instance, you could buy 2 of these cameras, Alpha 1s, for the cost of an FX9, or very close to it. You could buy a whole bunch of them for the cost of Venice. But I think for Venice and FX9 users and FX6 users, this is going to be a fantastic option to be able to match up footage easier and do easier color grading on the other end when you're in the edit booth. So this is a significant improvement to bringing this Cinetone S into the Alpha 1. One other thing too that is bettering the A9 II, remember that neither the A9 or the A9 II has picture profiles, so there's no such thing as S-Log 3 or 2 or any of those things. I love picture profile 10, for instance, but the Alpha 1 has all those profiles and Cinetone S as well, so that's a huge benefit to those who shoot and log all the time. The last thing I want to mention is, and I kind of got into this when I was talking about the still camera portion of it, but the rolling shutter is 2.8 times better because of the faster readout of the sensor. The sensor is able to read out so fast that it is reducing rolling shutter, or what we call jello, when you're panning and you see the ripples. So the Alpha 1 is going to be superior to any other full frame camera that Sony makes right now, probably anybody else too, because nobody's made a fast readout sensor like Sony yet. We're still waiting for that. So one other thing I want to mention too, just like the A7S III, in video, you're always talking 10-bit. So the Alpha 1 is not just able to do 4K, 120p. It can do that all day long. It can do 8K. It's actually oversampling 8.6K. It's actually gathering more information than 8K, which is pretty amazing. But it's doing this in 420. So every resolution, whatever you pick, whatever frame rate you pick, you're going to be in 10-bit and have the advantage of all that extra color gamut for your final product. Last, I just want to mention that the cost of the camera is $6,500 in the United States. It's more in Europe and Canada. And I wanted to point out my friend Mark Gaylor in Australia, down under. He points out that the Alpha 1 is $1 less than the 1DX Mark III from Canon, which I think is hilarious. So thanks, Mark, for that little tidbit. That's good stuff. The last part of this video is, what does all this mean? What does it mean? What does the Alpha 1 mean overall? Number one, the 400th of a second flash sync is significant. And the Alpha 1 is now available for all sports, not just field sports. So the NBA and the NHL in this country is going to benefit hugely from the Alpha 1 being put into use. That's number one. Second thing is anti-flicker in electronic shutter. I have no idea how they accomplish that. I'm not an engineer, so I couldn't figure it out. But even if I was, I don't think I'd be able to. It is a crazy cool feature to be able to do anti-flicker and not have to be forced into 10 frames a second on a mechanical shutter. So I very much appreciate that. The massive increase in autofocus tracking performance is not trivial. Speed and accuracy have now gone to an entirely different place, which I haven't seen yet, honestly. I can't wait to do it. As soon as they put a camera in my hands, believe me, I'll go tear it up and tell you all about it. 30 frames a second. Awesome. 30 frames a second. Yeah, I'll take it. Give me now. The A9 II is an awesome camera still, but the Alpha 1 is like an A9 II on steroids, and built into it is the A7S III, built into it is the A7R4. It's like the one camera that does everything not pretty good, but awesome. You're not settling for anything by doing Alpha 1. You're just going to get the best of everything. Even though the A7R4 technically has 10 more megapixels, I get that. And so maybe landscape people will stay with it, but not me. But also, I kind of want to mention that the S35 cinema lens owners, you're going to be shooting 4K all day long with this new camera. It's great. You're going to love it, and I think you're going to like the color science as well. As time goes on, the delineation between still photographers and people who shoot video is blurring all the time. Still photographers are being asked to shoot video constantly. Videographers are being asked to shoot stills all the time on set. This camera is kind of the melding of both worlds. It's the first camera of its type. And yes, you could go and shoot portraits with A7S III. I've done it. They're beautiful pictures, but you can't do a billboard with them, you know? So anyway, I think that, in the big picture, as time goes on, cameras are going to have to do everything well. They're not just going to be able to be specific, like have advantages in one little area. Alpha 1 shows that Sony can make a camera that's going to be great for everybody at the highest levels of photography and video and film. One other thing I want to mention too, I didn't touch on it at all, but for photojournalists out there, realize that the Alpha 1 is twice as fast as the A9 II at moving images through your phone or a server. So this camera at the Olympics is going to be absolutely indispensable. You're going to be able to get pictures out quicker than ever before. There's a fantastic story that J. Scott Applewhite from the Associated Press told about the sort of attack of the Senate and how he was shooting all these images as people were coming into the Senate chambers. And he elected to stay in there to document that. And part of his reason for staying was that he could continue to move images over the Ethernet and just get the images out electronically through the Wi-Fi system, so that all the way up until someone took his camera out of his hands, if that happened. I don't think it did, but he was ready to lose all his gear because he wouldn't have lost the pictures. So being able to go twice as fast as what Scott was able to do would have been beneficial to him, I'm sure. But anyway, this is going to be the camera for deadline sports, period. And so when you get to the Super Bowl, I think that you're going to see this camera, next year being utilized in the biggest way possible. One last thing I want to do is, if you have appreciated any part of this, I try really hard to make videos on YouTube that are coming from the perspective of a real photographer that has real assignments and has, I've got a whole lifetime, 30 years experience shooting as a photojournalist, sports photographer, whatever. And if you appreciate this, please A, subscribe to my channel, and B, there are 2 ways to buy an Alpha 1 in the description. So if you hit one of those links, one is to Bedford's, where you can actually get 5% off anything you buy by using the code PMR. And the second one is my Amazon affiliate. So if you click the Amazon, if you got Amazon, if you click on that, you can buy directly from Amazon, and I'll get a kick from it. So I would appreciate that. It helps me justify doing these kinds of videos now and in the future. And I promise you that as soon as Sony can get one of these things in my hands, I will go out and wear it out. And I'm going to come tell you about it firsthand. So I look forward to that. I hope it comes sooner than later. I've already pre-ordered my camera. I can't wait to get it. I'm Patrick Murphy-Racey, Sony Artisan of Imagery. Thank you so much for staying with me for this. Have a good one.